What if the universe, all of it, is not something you step into, but something that steps out of you? What if the stars, the rain, the stranger's smile, and even the ticking clock aren't external truths, but internal projections? Tonight, we trace the edges of perception to reveal something unsettling. Your brain isn't detecting reality, it's inventing it, from the color of the sky to the weight of your memories. This isn't the world as it is, it's the world as your mind assembles it. So lie back, and let the boundaries of out there slowly fall apart. It's not a window, it's a screen. What you're experiencing right now, this room, this voice, your own sense of being, isn't reality directly. It's the brain's internal rendering of data, stitched together into something called consciousness. You're not seeing the world, you're watching your brain's private film about it. This film has no theater, no projector, no screen you can touch, and yet it plays continuously 24 hours a day, even while you sleep. It's a silent movie filled with color, sound, and motion, produced entirely inside your head, and no one else gets to watch it. Not fully, not ever. Think about it. Light bounces off objects, enters your eyes, triggers a chemical reaction in your retina, and that signal travels to your visual cortex. But at no point do you actually see that light. You see your brain's best guess of what caused the signal. You're not witnessing the external world, you're watching a simulation of it, cleaned up, color-graded, and constantly edited for clarity. This simulation is not passive, it's predictive. Your brain is constantly forecasting what's next, what's around the corner, what that blurry shadow might be, what words someone is likely to say. It fills in gaps so quickly that you never notice them. Just like a movie editor cuts scenes together to feel seamless, your mind slices sensory fragments into the illusion of continuity. And unlike a film, this version is interactive. You look at something, and it becomes real to you. You ignore something, and it fades from existence. Not in the objective sense, but in the way that matters in your perception. Without your attention, even a falling tree in a forest might as well not exist. In fact, the you watching this movie is also a character in it. Your identity, your sense of self, is another output of the film, not its creator. The narrator voice you think is you isn't the observer. It's just another product of the production. Your conscious self is like an actor convinced he wrote the script. And yet, the movie feels so real. Why? Because it has to. Your survival depends on believing the movie. If you hesitated to act because you questioned whether the tiger chasing you was real, you'd be dead. So evolution didn't design your brain to know the truth. It designed it to create a usable fiction. This fiction is astonishingly stable, but only because your brain edits out everything that might contradict it. You're only shown what your nervous system deems relevant. You don't see the blood vessels in your own eyes. You don't hear your own heartbeat unless something goes wrong. You don't feel the constant pressure of your clothes. The movie trims the footage for comfort. What about dreams? They're the clearest proof that your brain doesn't need the world to create one. When you dream, your eyes are closed, your body is paralyzed, and yet you see, you hear, you feel terror, joy, confusion. The dream becomes your reality, at least until it doesn't. The only thing that changes between waking and dreaming is your level of doubt. So how can we trust that this waking world is different? How can we be sure the film hasn't simply switched genres from surrealist dream to realistic documentary? Here's the quiet answer. You can't. You can believe the movie, you can question the movie, but you can never leave the theater, because the theater is inside you. Your brain is the director, the set designer, the composer, the editor, the visual effects department, and the projectionist, all rolled into one. And it's been showing the same movie your entire life. The only thing that's changed is the plot. And right now that plot is whispering, maybe the world isn't real, maybe it never was. But your belief in it? That might be the most real thing you have. Reality, as you experience it, is always late. Not metaphorically, literally. Every moment you think you're living in is already over by the time your brain lets you notice it. By the time light hits your retina, gets transduced into neural signals, travels to your visual cortex, and then gets interpreted. The event that caused it is gone. You're not in the now, you're in the slightly after. About 80 milliseconds after, on average. It's not a glitch, it's a design feature, because the brain isn't just reacting to the world, it's constantly guessing what's coming next and then backdating your conscious experience to feel seamless. That guesswork, those predictive models, are stitched together in a way that gives you the illusion of being present, but you never are. Take this strange experiment. Researchers showed people a flash of light followed by a beep, but when they delayed the beep just slightly, subjects reported that the flash had also happened later, even though it hadn't. Their perception of time adjusted itself to match the prediction. The brain didn't just perceive events, it revised them. It happens every day. You just don't sit to notice. Imagine catching a ball. You don't react to the ball's current position. That would be too slow. Instead, your brain calculates the trajectory in advance, predicts where the ball will be, and makes your body move there, all before the ball arrives. If your perception of time were truly real time, you'd miss it. Every time. So your brain cheats. It delays your conscious awareness, just enough to let its predictions come true. Then it plays the scene back as if it were happening live, like a magician who already knows which card you're going to pick, but still lets you believe it's spontaneous. This means your reality, the one you believe you're moving through, is a recreation, a delay loop, a polished memory of something that's already over. You live in a post-production cut of the universe. And this isn't just about time, it's about everything you sense. Consider backward masking, where a second sound can erase the perception of a first, even though the first sound came earlier. Your brain, when faced with uncertainty, holds onto sensory input, just long enough to wait for more context, and then rewrites what you think you heard. It's like rewriting the beginning of a sentence after hearing the end. So if your brain is always late, and always rewriting, how do you know anything is real at all? You don't sit. And even more unsettling, neither does your brain. It doesn't know the world, it only knows signals. And those signals are always behind. Which raises a deeper question. If your experience is built on delay and guesswork, then when do you ever truly arrive in the moment? The answer, never. You're always catching up to something that's already gone. But the illusion is perfect. It has to be. Otherwise, you'd feel like you were lagging, like reality was glitching and stuttering behind your thoughts. And sometimes you do. Déjà vu, time dilation, temporal disorientation. All of these are glimpses into the machinery breaking down. It saps why accidents feel like slow motion. Why moments of fear stretch unnaturally. Why a dream can feel like an hour, but take 5 seconds. Time, in your head, isn't a ticking metronome. It's a flexible fiction, molded not by clocks, but by attention, emotion, and memory. And at the center of it is your brain's best trick, convincing you that this fiction is happening right now. That now even exists. But in reality, now is just a guess. A story, a smooth lie told by neurons to keep you from realizing the truth. The present doesn't exist, not the way you think it does. You are always too late. And yet, somehow, always on time, for a version of the world that's been reconstructed, reinterpreted, and remixed to feel like it's unfolding in real time. You are living in a delay, a beautiful, invisible pause, one your brain refuses to show you, because to see it would be to fall out of sync with everything. And so, it hides it from you, and you go on believing this is the moment. Even though it isn't set. You've heard it said that the eyes are the windows to the soul, but in truth, they're more like stained glass, coloring, distorting, and filtering light before it ever reaches the cathedral of the mind. And even that's generous, because the retina, the layer of cells at the back of your eye responsible for detecting light, starts lying to you before you even open your eyes. Here's the trick. You think you're seeing the world in full, rich, seamless clarity, but biologically, that's impossible. Let's begin with the blind spot. Right now, there is a literal hole in your vision, a place on your retina where the optic nerve connects, which contains no photoreceptors, no rods, no cones, nothing. It's a black void where the outside world cannot be registered, and yet, you don't see a hole. Why? Because your brain fills it in, automatically, with guesswork, with nearby visual information, with whatever would make sense. You've been hallucinating part of your vision your entire life, and you never noticed. But it gets worse. The retina doesn't capture a clear image of the world, not even close. It captures fragments. Light photons scatter in, and the photoreceptors, which are wired backward by the way, begin transducing them into signals. But only a tiny part of the retina, the fovea, can perceive with high resolution. The rest is fuzzy, low detail, peripheral guesswork. So why do you feel like your entire visual field is clear and crisp? Because your brain is stitching together multiple blurry snapshots, pasting them into a seamless panorama, like a smartphone camera creating a perfect HDR image, but only after combining multiple imperfect exposures. You see clarity, but your eye doesn't capture clarity. It constructs it after the fact. And those rods and cones you trust so deeply, they're limited in scope. You can't see ultraviolet, you can't see infrared. You're blind to nearly all of the electromagnetic spectrum. You're not seeing the world. You're seeing a narrow, filtered version tailored to what evolution deemed useful. You don't see reality. You see what helped your ancestors survive. Now let's talk about color. Color doesn't exist outside of you. It's not a property of objects. It's a sensation created in your brain, based on how different wavelengths of light are interpreted by your three types of cones. But what you call red might not be the same as someone else's red, and the apple you see as glossy and crimson, it doesn't possess that color. It reflects wavelengths that your brain interprets that way. Even more chilling, in the absence of light, your retina still fires. In total darkness, neurons still twitch, static still crackles, and your brain sometimes fills it with patterns, floating shapes, flashes, imagined textures. Ever stared at the inside of your eyelids and seen shapes moving? That's not light. That's noise. Your retina, lying to you in the absence of input. And then there's saccadic masking, perhaps the most insidious trick of all. Your eyes move constantly, darting from point to point in rapid, jerky motions called saccades. During these motions, your brain deliberately shuts off visual processing. It creates momentary blindness, so that you don't perceive the blur, but you're not aware of this blindness. The brain edits out the black frames and splices together the movie so that it feels smooth. Like a film editor cutting out the camera shakes. Like a dream you don't realize you sit redreaming. So you walk through the world with confidence, believing your vision is objective, continuous, and accurate. But you're really living in a painting your brain updates on the fly, based on incomplete data, filled in gaps, and thousands of milliseconds of delay. The retina lies because it has to. It lies to reduce chaos. It lies to simplify the impossible flood of photons and reflections and shadows into a manageable illusion, and the brain, desperate to make sense of the chaos, gladly accepts the lie, paints over the holes, and hands it to you as truth. And what do? You believe it. You don't question the gap. You don't see the blur. You don't notice the constant cuts and edits, because you were never meant to. You were only meant to see enough to survive. Not enough to see the lie. Inside your skull is a cartographer, not the kind with parchment and ink, but one made of neurons, constantly constructing a map of the world, and of you inside it. This map is not drawn once, it's redrawn every second, every blink, every breath, and it's not passive, it's generative. It doesn't just record what exists, it decides what exists. We call this map the BrainSIP's spatial model. Imagine walking into a dark room. You don't need to see the coffee table to know it's there. Your feet adjust, your arms reach instinctively. You're not reacting to vision. You're reacting to a memory embedded in your internal model of space. Your brain predicted the environment based on stored information. It mapped the world before the lights ever turned on. This isn't SIPT imagination. It's SIPT survival. Deep in the posterior parietal cortex, neurons fire to represent the geometry of the room around you, the distance between walls, the location of objects, the position of your limbs. It's a personal GPS, but one that doesn't need satellites. It uses proprioception, vestibular input, past experience, and prediction to draw the layout of your world. But here's the trick. You mistake the map for the territory. When you perceive space, you believe you're experiencing something external, the arrangement of things out there, but you're really feeling the structure your brain built to make sense of those things. You're walking through an internal simulation of the world, one that's constantly updated, but never truly confirmed. This becomes clear when the map breaks. Stroke victims with hemispatial neglect, for example, lose awareness of half their world, not because their eyes stop working, but because their map of space gets corrupted. They'll eat food from only one side of their plate, shave only half their face, not because they don't see the other half, but because their brain doesn't recognize that side exists anymore. The world they live in is half the size of yours. And then there's the rubber hand illusion. A subject sees a fake rubber hand stroked while their real hand, hidden from view, is stroked in sync. Within moments, the brain accepts the rubber hand as its own. The internal map of the body updates. The brain rewrites its geography based on multisensory input. If the rubber hand is suddenly struck, the person flinches. Pain is expected. Ownership is assigned. The brain doesn't just map the outside world. It maps your body into that world. This body map, known as the body schema, can stretch, shrink, and drift. Amputees often feel phantom limbs, sensations in arms or legs that no longer exist. The map remains, even when the territory is gone. The brain refuses to let go of its blueprint. And when the body and the world conflict, the map decides which one to trust. Virtual reality experiments show this beautifully. When you put on a headset, your real body might be standing still, but your inner map accepts the digital world. Your stomach turns during a virtual roller coaster. Your heart races in a virtual fall. Why? Because your Mapmaker accepted the new space as real, and your body reacts accordingly. It doesn't state truth to update the map, just coherence. The map is tuned for consistency, not for accuracy, and that's where the illusion gets dangerous. Because if your inner model is wrong, the world you live in becomes wrong too, and you won't know it. The brain doesn't come with warning labels that say, "This room may not exist." It only offers a feeling of certainty. And that feeling is the biggest lie of all. The Mapmaker is quiet. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in spatial expectation, in invisible coordinates and distances you feel but never question. It tells you how far to reach, when to duck, where you are, who you are. But behind the curtain, the world it built may have little to do with what's actually there. Because you, Stev, never lived in the world, only in the map of it. And the map was drawn in darkness, by guesses, by experience, by emotion. You carry it in your head, and you believe it sips the truth. You've looked up at it your whole life. That wide, infinite blue, the sky, vast, distant, obvious. But what if it was never really up there? What if the sky you see is a projection, not of sunlight or atmosphere, but of something deeper and more intimate? Your brain's attempt to make sense of wavelengths it cannot truly grasp. Because here's the strange truth. The sky has no color. Not inherently. Not objectively. Blue is not something that floats above you. It's not a pigment painted on the dome of heaven. It's a sensation, generated entirely inside your head. Let's walk through it. Sunlight, pure and white, hits the Earth's atmosphere and scatters. Because blue wavelengths are shorter, they scatter more widely. That's the physics part. But scattering isn't perception. The photons themselves are not blue. They carry no color. They are just packets of energy. It's only when they strike the photoreceptors in your retina, your cones, that the brain begins the alchemy of color. You have 3 types of cones, each tuned to different wavelength ranges, short, medium, and long L. When a particular pattern of activation occurs, more stimulation in the S cones, some in the M, little in the L, your visual cortex interprets this as blue. But blue is a feeling, not a frequency. No machine can tell you what blue feels like, and no 2 brains are guaranteed to feel it the same way. You and someone else may both call the sky blue, but you might be living in entirely different internal realities. Color is not in the sky, it's in your mind. The brain, then, doesn't just translate light into vision. It creates an artistic interpretation, a sensory metaphor. It paints the sky with meanings, with emotion, with memory. That's why sunsets feel tragic. That's why grey skies feel heavy. That's why a certain shade of morning can make you feel like a child again. Because your brain isn't rendering the world as it is, it's rendering the world as it matters to you. And it does more than assign color. It assigns scale. Ever looked at the moon low on the horizon and thought it looked massive? And then later, high in the sky, it seems to shrink. It didn't change, but your brain's perception of distance, foreground, and spatial context fooled you. The sky isn't just color, it's story. This is known as the moon illusion, and it reveals how the brain doesn't just paint, it composes. It adds shadow, depth, emotion, proportion. Just like a painter exaggerates light to convey a feeling, your brain amplifies contrast, suppresses detail, invents color gradients that aren't physically present. The sky isn't sept blue, it's sept blued by your mind. And when it turns grey with clouds, that too is an interpretation. Clouds are mostly transparent, but your brain, expecting opacity and mass, renders them as solid. It gives them weight. It gives them mood. Have you ever felt uneasy on an overcast day without knowing why? That wasn't the weather. That was your internal colorist, tuning the scene to something darker. Artists and filmmakers mimic this all the time. They manipulate color grading to evoke emotion, desaturation for sadness, gold hues for nostalgia, blue tints for anxiety. But your brain has been doing this all along. Not with Photoshop, but with neural filters evolved over millennia. Even brightness isn't sempre real. Your pupils adjust, your retina adapts, but your brain invents brightness levels based on context. A white square surrounded by dark appears brighter than the same square surrounded by light. Even though the pixel value is identical, it's not the light that changes, it's the interpretation. And then there are optical illusions, proof that the painter in your head can be fooled. The dress that broke the internet, blue and black or white and gold, it depended entirely on your brain's assumptions about the lighting source. Two people could look at the same image and live in entirely different realities, because the sky isn't blue, the shadows aren't black, the world isn't fixed. It's painted, in real time, by your brain's invisible hand. And it doesn't just color the sky. It colors everything. It colors the face of someone you love. It colors the moment before a goodbye. It colors the air before a storm. And it's doing it right now, while you listen, while you breathe, while your brain quietly decides what this moment should feel like. The sky above you is not the sky above everyone else. Because the world is not a picture. It sips a painting. And you are both the viewer and the artist. Close your eyes for a moment. And listen. Really listen to the hum of your room. The distant bark of a dog. The rustle of your breath. You think you're hearing sound. External vibrations crashing into your ears and announcing the world to your awareness. But what you're actually hearing is silence, interpreted. Because sound, like color, is not something out there. It's something your brain makes. A translation of air pressure waves into the illusion of tone, pitch, rhythm, and meaning. And the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Let's start with the ear. Sound begins as a mechanical disturbance. Air molecules compressing and rarefying, often just a few thousandths of a millimeter apart. These waves strike your eardrum, which vibrates in sync. Those vibrations move through tiny bones in your middle ear, reaching the cochlea, a fluid-filled spiral in your inner ear, where thousands of hair cells are triggered. Each responds to a different frequency. And that's where hearing stops, and hallucination begins. Your brain doesn't hear those vibrations. It interprets the pattern of neural firing from the cochlea as sound, the tone of a violin, the snap of a twig, the whisper of your name. These are not direct experiences. They're internally constructed simulations, guesses about what the vibrations probably mean. Now, here's the twist. Your brain doesn't wait for the sound to fully arrive before deciding what it is. It predicts it in advance. This is called predictive coding, and it means that much of what you hear was assembled before the actual sound data finished arriving. That's why you can instantly recognize a familiar voice from just a single syllable. Your brain fills in the rest automatically. Sometimes the brain fills in sound even when it's not there at all. Ever heard your phone buzz in your pocket? But it didn't. That's a phantom sound. A hallucinated stimulus. Your brain expected it, so it delivered it, regardless of whether the vibration actually happened. And then there sits the phenomenon of auditory completion. Play a spoken sentence with a brief, loud noise replacing one word. Your brain still hears the missing word, not consciously, not as a guess. You literally hear it, because your brain inserted it into the soundtrack of your perception, using context and expectation. The silence was there, but you never noticed. So what does this mean? It means you don't live in a world of sound. You live in a world of predicted meaning, dressed up as noise. You're not hearing reality, you're hearing your brain's assumptions, colored by memory, emotion, and attention. Take the McGurk effect. When the audio of someone saying "ba" is paired with a video of them clearly mouthing "fa", your brain hears "fa", even though the sound hasn't changed. Your brain prioritizes the visual cue and rewrites the auditory perception to match. You think you're hearing objectively. You're not. You're hearing what the brain thinks you should hear. This is why voices sound different in recordings. When you speak, you hear a version of your voice filtered through your bones and skull, but the world hears something else. And when you hear yourself played back, raw, unfiltered, unfamiliar, it's not because the audio is wrong, it's because your internal simulation of your own sound is a lie. A personalized hallucination. Even the perception of loudness is subjective. Play the same tone at two different times. If you expect one to be louder, your brain might perceive it that way. Even if the decibel levels are identical, your ears don't decide volume. Your attention does. So what is silence? Is it the absence of sound, or the absence of predicted input? In an anechoic chamber, a room designed to block all external sound, people often report hearing strange things, their heartbeat, the rush of blood, the creak of their own joints, but stay long enough, and some begin to hallucinate, not because their senses have broken, but because their brains can't tolerate unstructured input. In the absence of data, the brain generates sound anyway. The silence becomes too loud. And when silence is no longer predictable, it becomes terrifying. This is the paradox at the heart of hearing. It feels passive, but it's wildly active. It feels like the world is reaching you, but it's you reaching out into the world, grabbing raw vibrations and crafting them into experience. The crash of thunder, the softness of rain, the sound of your own name whispered in a dream. You stir not a microphone. You stir a composer. And what you hear is your brain's soundtrack to a world it can never touch directly. Beneath every note, every voice, every noise, there is only silence. And from that silence, your mind builds meaning. Your eyes are open. You're alert. You're sure of what you're seeing. The edges of your room, the words on this screen, the shape of your own hands resting nearby. But here's the quiet truth. Much of what you see isn't actually there. Your brain doesn't just detect reality, it fabricates it, and often, it fills your world with things that never existed in the first place. This isn't set poetic. It's seps neurological. Let's begin with a well-known lie, the Kinesa triangle. You've likely seen it, a simple image where Pac-Man-like shapes are arranged, so that your brain perceives a bright white triangle floating over them. But there is no triangle, no outline, nothing actually there. Your brain invents it, adding lines and edges that don't exist. Why? Because your visual system is wired for coherence, not accuracy. When given ambiguous or incomplete information, it guesses, and it does so with such confidence that you experience fiction as fact. This is how you function. The world is full of shadows, motion blur, visual noise, partial occlusion. If your brain waited for perfect clarity, you'd never recognize anything. So instead, it leaps ahead, makes assumptions, fills in blanks. You see people through fog. You see motion in still images. You see faces in clouds, in rock formations, in the burn marks on toast. This phenomenon, called pareidolia, is your brain's visual pattern recognition system on overdrive, and it's no accident. Seeing a predator that isn't there is safer than missing one that is. Evolution favored false positives. But this also means that your brain is predisposed to hallucinate. And often, you don't even notice. Think about your peripheral vision. Outside the center of your gaze, detail fades fast. Colors dull, shapes blur. But your experience of the world feels smooth and full. Why? Because your brain paints in the details. Not based on what's actually there, but what it expects to be there. In a way, you're walking through a dream that's been stabilized by prediction. And when that prediction breaks, the hallucinations become obvious. Consider Charles Bonnet syndrome, where people who have lost their sight begin to vividly see things that aren't real, faces, animals, geometric patterns. These aren't signs of psychosis. They're the brain's attempt to fill in the silence. Deprived of input, it generates vision anyway, because the brain isn't passive, it's hungry, and when the world doesn't provide content, it creates it. But this doesn't just happen in illness. It happens to you, all the time, in subtle, invisible ways. Ever glanced at your phone and thought you saw a notification that wasn't there? Ever believed you saw someone you recognized, only to realize it was a stranger? These are moments when your brain guessed wrong, and rendered a reality that never happened. And then there are full-blown visual hallucinations, often caused by sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, or altered states. Under the right conditions, the visual cortex begins producing patterns, lights, and scenes on its own, not as metaphors, but as lived experiences. The person hallucinating doesn't believe they are seeing something, they are seeing it. Because the line between perception and imagination isn't as solid as you'd like to think. In fact, neurologically speaking, perception is imagination, constrained by sensory input. The same visual areas that activate when you see an object also activate when you imagine it. The difference is a matter of degree, not kind. What you call seeing is simply high confidence, imagination that aligns with outside data, and sometimes, imagination runs ahead of the input. Like when you think you see someone watching you in the dark, or when you catch movement out of the corner of your eye but nothing's there, or when you wake from a dream and the room still feels strange, tilted, unfamiliar, like reality hasn't fully loaded yet. Your eyes may be open, but your mind is still deciding what to show you, and often, it chooses comfort, or fear, or story, because your visual world isn't a photograph, it's a projection, layered with memory, filtered by emotion, directed by expectation. You never see raw data, you see narrative, sculpted frame by frame, belief by belief. You are not a witness, you are a viewer. And the world you're watching is partly fiction, because every moment your brain is seeing things that aren't there, and calling them real. You think you see with your eyes, but your emotions hold the brush. What you feel shapes what you perceive, not just how you interpret the world, but what the world is to you in that moment. Your emotional state alters vision, sound, time, space. It reconfigures the entire structure of your reality, not metaphorically, not poetically, mechanically, biologically, moment by moment. Imagine standing in a forest. If you're calm, the trees feel peaceful. The wind is soothing. The rustle of leaves sounds like music. Now imagine standing in the same forest, heart racing, fear in your chest. Suddenly, the shadows lengthen. Every creak is a threat. The same sensory input, but a different world. This is not imagination. This is the brain rebuilding reality through the lens of effect. Deep in your brain lies a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, one of the core hubs for processing emotion. It doesn't just respond to threats or pleasure, it feeds into the sensory systems themselves. It changes how your visual cortex prioritizes information. It alters auditory perception. It signals to your thalamus what deserves your attention. When you're angry, your brain sharpens contrast and movement detection. You perceive threat more easily, even when none exists. When you're depressed, the world feels flat. Colors mute, sound dulls. You experience life as if behind glass, not because your senses are broken, but because the emotion running beneath them alters how the world is constructed. Emotion builds the world by deciding what matters. You never perceive everything. The brain is selective by necessity. There's too much noise, too much chaos. So emotion steps in as a filter, elevating some things, erasing others. When you're in love, the beloved's face seems radiant, their voice melodic. That's not poetry. That's altered perception. You're not hallucinating, you're prioritizing. Your emotional circuitry pushes certain features into the spotlight, while softening the rest of the world into background blur. And when you're grieving, the world doesn't just feel different. It looks different. Colors seem colder, light feels harsher. Even time slows, not because clocks change, but because grief hijacks your temporal processing centers. MRI scans show how emotion reconfigures the default mode network, the system responsible for self-awareness and internal narrative, warping the story you're living inside. You think you live in a stable universe, but you actually live in an emotional field, where the laws of perception bend and shift based on what your body is feeling. This is why two people can walk through the same street and experience completely different realities. One hears laughter as threatening, another hears it as joyous. One sees crowded faces as suffocating, another sees them as a source of energy. The difference isn't external, it's internal modulation. Even your sense of space can shift. Under anxiety, the world can feel too close. Under dissociation, too far away. Panic can make a hallway feel endless. Joy can make a room glow. Your emotional state acts as a gravitational lens, bending the fabric of your sensory universe. This isn't SIT delusion, it's SIT's function. The brain evolved to tailor perception to need. Emotion sharpens survival. Fear makes you overdetect danger. Lust makes you ignore flaws. Sadness makes you scan for comfort. Even boredom alters perception. Time stretches, textures dull, patterns lose meaning. What sips real in those moments? Everything and nothing. Because the world doesn't change, your construction of it does. And construction is never neutral. It's always flavored by hormones, shaped by neurotransmitters, sculpted by childhood, wired by trauma. The same sound, color, texture. One day it soothes you, another day it crushes you. you are not experiencing the world. You are experiencing a world emotionally selected and neurally assembled, one breath at a time. The scariest part? You don't yet notice it happening. You feel certain that what you're seeing is just how things are, that the people around you are truly that cold, that loud, that beautiful, that cruel, but much of what you see in them, and in the world, is colored by what's happening inside of you. This is the emotional illusion. That your perception is objective, when it is in fact deeply personal. You do not see the world clearly. You see the world as you are. And that sip's not a flaw. It sits the only way you've ever known how to see. Stretch out your arm, and point to where the world is. Easy, right? The coffee cup is over there. The wall is behind you. Your body is here. Space feels simple, obvious, even. Objects occupy positions. Distances can be measured. You are inside a three-dimensional world, moving through it. Except, you aren't set. Not in the way you think. Because space, that solid framework you live inside, isn't something your brain detects. It's something your brain creates. You don't experience out there. You experience a spatial mirage, a constructed stage, updated in real time, so seamlessly that it fools even you. Let's start with the strange way your senses converge. Each input, vision, hearing, touch, proprioception, arrives separately, asynchronously, and from different organs. Your eyes detect light, your ears detect pressure waves, your skin detects vibration and stretch. There's no built-in GPS, no centralized grid, yet your brain somehow aligns all these signals into a coherent shared map of space. How? It cheats. The brain uses internal models, learned over a lifetime, to estimate where things should be. When you hear a sound coming from the left, and you also see something moving on your left, the brain decides they're probably the same source, even if they arrived milliseconds apart. It synchronizes them, fuses them, assigns them a place in your imagined world. This is how you perceive unity. It's not data-driven. It's guesswork, layered with expectation, and refined by feedback. Now, consider ventriloquism. A puppet opens its mouth while the ventriloquist speaks. The sound is coming from the speaker's throat, yet your brain places the voice at the puppet's mouth. The visual cue overrules the auditory one. You don't just interpret the voice as coming from the puppet, you hear it there. Your brain relocates sound in space to fit the narrative. Or take the rubber hand illusion again. You watch a fake hand being stroked while your hidden real hand is stroked in sync. Within seconds, your sense of body location shifts. Your brain adopts the rubber hand into its body schema, placing you in a new spatial position. If your sense of where you are can be tricked, what does that say about the rest of the world? Experiments in virtual reality show this clearly. By tweaking visual and auditory feedback, researchers can make people feel like they've left their body, floating above themselves, or inhabiting a body of a different age, race, even species. The you in space is flexible, the environment around you even more so. But it gets weirder. Close your eyes and raise your hand. Without seeing it, you know where it is. That's proprioception, your sense of internal position. But it's not perfect. If you hold your arm in one spot for a long time without moving, your sense of its location fades. It blurs. Without active signals, the map begins to dissolve. Even your sense of hear is constantly maintained, updated by muscle tension, vestibular input, breath, heartbeat. There sits no fixed anchor. You're like a character in a video game, whose world is being rendered just ahead of each step, based on assumptions, not raw data. And then there sits spatial neglect. Patients with damage to certain areas of the brain can lose awareness of half of space, not just their vision, but their conceptual map. They might eat food from only one side of the plate, shave only half their face, draw clocks missing the entire left side. To them, the missing space doesn't feel hidden. It doesn't feel blank. It simply doesn't instead exist. Because the brain doesn't just represent space, it creates it. And when the generator breaks, so does the world. This mirage extends beyond external objects. Even the space inside your mind is spatialized. You imagine time as a line. You feel thoughts approaching. You turn over an idea. You visualize yourself from above. All metaphors, all maps, all illusions your brain generates to structure the intangible. But there is no inner space, no thought floating toward you, no actual past behind you or future ahead. just the now, and a spatial story your brain builds around it. You are not in space. You are space, constructed around a point of view, wrapped around attention, folding and unfolding based on where you direct your gaze, your thought, your expectation. And in this mirage, this imagined container, you call it real, because the alternative is too strange, that there is no out there, only in here. You are surrounded by holes, in vision, in sound, in memory, in logic, but you never notice. Not because the gaps don't exist, but because your brain is an expert editor, seamlessly filling in what's missing before you even realize anything's gone. And you believe it. Every time. Imagine reading this sentence. The C_T us_T on the M_T. You instantly know what it says. You don't pause. You don't question. Your brain inserts letters without asking permission. You don't read the text. You reconstruct it. Now expand that principle to everything you experience. Your senses are incomplete at best. Your retina has a blind spot where the optic nerve exits the eye, an actual hole in your visual field with zero information, yet you never see it. The brain simply paints over the absence, borrowing from nearby color and shape. The illusion is so perfect that most people live their entire lives unaware that part of their vision is fabricated. But that's just the start. Saccadic masking, the phenomenon where your brain blacks out the blur that occurs every time your eyes dart from one object to another, means you're regularly blind, but unaware. Between the eye movements and the blind spot, your visual experience should be a chaotic mess. But it isn't. It's clean, smooth, continuous. Because your brain fills in the blanks, automatically, invisibly, and constantly. And it doesn't just do this with sight. You don't hear every word someone says in a noisy room, but your brain fills in the missing syllables based on context and lip movements. You think you heard the whole sentence. You didn't. In music, your brain can even complete a melody, remove a note, and listeners still report hearing it. Not as a guess, but as an actual sound. Because when something fits a known pattern, your mind supplies the missing piece. This is called perceptual completion. And it works across every sense. You even fill in time. Ever glanced at a clock and felt the second hand take an oddly long time to move? That's the stopped clock illusion. When your eyes first land on the clock, your brain backdates your awareness, stretching the moment before it to feel longer. It manufactures a seamless timeline by adjusting reality itself. Memory works the same way. Eyewitnesses often confidently recall details that were never there. A red car, a man in a hat, a weapon. These aren't lies. They're reconstructions. The brain fills in memory gaps with whatever makes the story coherent. Once the blanks are filled, they become indistinguishable from real memories. And you trust them. Deeply. Because the brain doesn't flag filled-in data as edited. It doesn't tell you what's real and what's guessed. It simply offers a final draft. Smooth, believable, and ready to live in. Why does it do this? Because uncertainty is dangerous. If you had to stop and verify every detail, did I really see that? Was that sound real? Is this memory accurate? You'd freeze. So instead, the brain creates certainty. False, maybe, but functional. And over time, you begin to believe the edited version more than the raw one. Even in language. You might mishear a word, but if it fits the sentence, you accept it. Your mind retroactively adjusts the sentence around the error. It prefers coherence over accuracy. In relationships, in conversations, in everyday experiences, you don't just live in the world, you live in your brain's reconstruction of it, one that constantly smooths, corrects, invents, and forgets. Sometimes that sits comforting. Sometimes it sits terrifying. Because it means that what you remember may not have happened. That what you saw may not have existed. That what you heard may have been silence, retroactively filled. This isn't SEP's failure. It's SEP's design. The brain isn't a recording device. It's a story machine. And to keep the story believable, it hides its edits. Like a good movie editor, it cuts between scenes without showing the seams. No jump cuts. No flickers. Just clean illusion. But once you know this, you start to notice the cracks. The conversations you remember differently. The words you thought you heard. The gaps in your memory that feel too convenient. And you realize something unnerving. Your life is full of blanks. And your brain has been writing fiction in them all along. Imagine walking into a room and flipping on the light. The darkness disappears instantly. The scene reveals itself, a clean, sharp transition, or so it seems. But what if that clarity you feel isn't just a function of the room being lit, but of your brain deciding that now is when the world becomes real? This is the illusion of sudden perception, the light switch moment when reality seems to arrive all at once. We trust it. It feels intuitive, but it's not how the brain works, not even close. Because what your brain gives you is not a live feed. It's a fabricated reveal. Let's take a step back. You open your eyes. Within milliseconds, your visual cortex begins processing light input, raw, messy signals of contrast and edge. But that information doesn't arrive in one neat image. It trickles in through multiple parallel streams, shape, motion, color, depth, all handled in different parts of the brain. Yet what you experience is an instant scene, not a loading screen, not a fuzzy transition. Just the world. Boom, as if it was always there. This is because your brain holds onto data long enough to wait for clarity, and then presents it to you, as if it happened all at once. It's a bit like a magician who lets your attention catch up after the trick is already done. You never saw the setup. Just the reveal. One famous experiment shows this clearly. Subjects were shown a faint visual stimulus, just at the edge of perception. If it was followed closely by a strong flash of light, they reported seeing the earlier faint image more clearly than when no flash occurred at all. How? Because the later event, the flash, retroactively sharpened the brain's confidence in the earlier moment. The brain essentially said, that must been something important. Let's enhance that memory and play it back like it was obvious. You never perceive the moment when something becomes clear. You perceive the edited replay, crafted to look instantaneous. This is the light switch illusion. You think your brain turns reality on like a lamp. In truth, it assembles fragments, predicts meaning, cross-checks memory, and finally pushes out the illusion of sudden clarity. By the time you think I see it now, the decision has already been made, hundreds of milliseconds earlier, and your brain is just queuing up the illusion of discovery. It's like watching a movie where the twist is so good, you swear you saw it coming, but you didn't. Your brain reconstructed the expectation after the fact. This happens constantly. You walk into a room and feel like you immediately understand the space, how big it is, where the walls are, what objects are in your peripheral vision. But all of that takes time. Your brain patches it together and serves it as a finished whole. You meet someone new, and within seconds, you just know what they're like. Confident, kind, suspicious. But that's not insight. That's predictive filtering, based on facial patterns and social memory. You didn't see their true self. You saw your brain's best guess, polished and packaged as certainty. Even thoughts work like this. Have you ever had an idea that seemed to pop into your mind? A solution, a realization, a name that suddenly appears. It feels like it arrived fully formed, but your brain was working on it all along, beneath the surface. It simply didn't notify your conscious self until the result was ready, and then it handed it to you with a bow saying, "Here you go, instant brilliance." But the brilliance was delayed, and the delay was hidden. Because the illusion of instant insight is more comforting than the truth, that your brain is always guessing, always revising, always catching up. This applies even to danger. When you jump back from a snake-like stick, your body reacts before your awareness does. The motor response is triggered by low-level circuits. Your conscious mind comes in a moment later and retrofits a story. I saw the danger and moved. But no, you moved. And then your brain filled in the story. Just like flipping a light switch and believing the room appeared all at once, when in reality your brain flipped it long before you realized it. So the next time clarity strikes, the next time a realization feels like it arrived in a flash, pause. Ask yourself if it really did. Because the moment of clarity you trust so deeply might be nothing more than the brain's most convincing special effect. And just like a magic trick, it only works if you don't look too closely. Everything you've ever known, every color, every sound, every face, every memory, every sensation of the universe unfolding around you is running on a power budget of about 12 watts. 12. That's the amount of electrical energy your brain consumes to generate consciousness. The same as a dim light bulb, less than many Wi-Fi routers, a flicker of power, and yet, somehow, it holds your entire universe. It should feel impossible. It should feel laughable. But that tiny trickle of electricity is all it takes for the brain to simulate the sky, the earth, time, pain, beauty, and meaning. Not because the universe is small, but because your version of it is incredibly efficient, sculpted down to only what your body needs to survive. Let's get technical for a moment. Your brain runs on about 20% of your body's energy, even though it makes up only about 2% of your body weight. That's still only about 12 to 15 watts at rest, enough to power an old incandescent light bulb. But in that energy budget, the brain manages to operate approximately 86 billion neurons, each making thousands of connections, firing patterns that loop, crash, predict, fail, and retry every millisecond. And yet, you feel awake. You feel like you are here, inside a vast continuous experience that seems so much bigger than your skull could ever contain. But it sits not vast. It sits compressed. Because your brain doesn't simulate the entire world. It simulates a model of the world. It only renders what's useful, what's relevant, what's emotionally loaded or biologically significant. And it discards the rest, the slow shadows, the repeating patterns, the unimportant details, all deleted before they reach your conscious awareness. This is a feature, not a flaw. Because consciousness is expensive, not in watts, but in complexity. Every thought, every awareness, every attention shift costs metabolic energy. So your brain streamlines. It takes shortcuts. It creates what neuroscientists call sparse representations, mental approximations that allow you to act fast, survive danger, recognize patterns, and move through the world without being overloaded. You don't see everything. You see what 12 watts can afford. The world you live in, the sounds you hear, the faces you recognize, the feelings you trust, are all part of a hyper-efficient simulation, optimized for survival, not truth. Take vision, for example. The actual bandwidth required to transmit high-resolution visual data from your eyes to your brain is enormous. So the brain cheats. It prioritizes the center of your vision, the fovea, uses low-detail blur for the periphery, and fills in gaps using memory and guesswork. You feel like you're seeing a vivid, full-resolution world, but what you're actually seeing is a small patch of clarity surrounded by illusion. Or take memory. The average brain doesn't store perfect video of your life. It stores fragments, narrative tags, emotional highlights, reconstructed scenes. The storage method is lossy, like a compressed audio file. You remember only what matters. What you recall later is not a replay, but a recreation. The same applies to emotion, time, even identity. You don't have a stable personality. You have a story that your brain keeps stitching together using minimal data, enough to feel consistent, but always rewriting itself in the background. The illusion of a fixed self is another energy-saving trick. 12 watts. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to fabricate gods, cities, symphonies, regrets, hope. But not enough to show you reality as it is. Just enough to show you a world good enough to believe in. This raises a haunting question. What if reality is far larger, stranger, deeper than we could ever perceive? But our brains simply can't afford to render it. What if there are dimensions of experience that 12 watts can't illuminate? We think we're seeing everything, but we're likely in a minimalist simulation, not run by machines but by biology. The very shape of your universe is constrained by the metabolic limits of your brain. You don't hear frequencies beyond a certain range. You don't see ultraviolet. You don't feel magnetic fields. Other animals do. Their 12 watts produce different realities. So, whose version is real? Yours? The bat sits? The octopus sits? Or none of them? Maybe the real world is unknowable. Maybe it's too high definition, too strange, too vast to ever be perceived in full. But your brain doesn't need full reality. It needs a believable one. One that works just well enough to keep you alive. One that makes you trust your surroundings, your senses, yourself. One that feels solid, even though it's stitched together by a low-powered organ, floating in cerebrospinal fluid, fed by sugar, flickering with ions. That sits the miracle. And the trap. Because as long as the simulation feels consistent, you'll never question the wattage. You'll never ask what was left out to keep the lights on. You'll just believe. And you still call it truth. Where do you end? Is it your skin? Your skull? Your breath? Is it the final strand of hair? The last nerve ending? The outermost layer of your awareness? It feels like the answer should be clear. You are here, and the world is there, a defined boundary between self and other, inside and out. But the truth is, the boundary doesn't exist, at least not where you think it does. The self is not a container. It's not a shape. It's not a place in space. It's a shifting pattern of attention, with edges drawn by the brain and redrawn as needed. Let's start with the basics. The brain constructs your self through an integration of body signals, sensory inputs, memories, emotions, and expectations. This process is dynamic, continuous, and mostly unconscious. You don't wake up each day and reassemble your identity from scratch. It assembles itself, often before you're even fully awake. But that assembly isn't set-bounded by your body. You can feel yourself extend into the world. When you use a tool, a pen, a hammer, a steering wheel, your brain incorporates it into your body schema. You don't think I'm holding a pen, you think I'm writing. The pen becomes part of you. The boundary stretches. In virtual reality, this gets even stranger. People placed in virtual bodies, taller, shorter, of different species, begin to feel those bodies as their own. Their posture, voice, and even beliefs shift to match. The self migrates to wherever the brain is paying attention. Or consider the act of driving. Your sense of self doesn't stay within your body. It expands to include the vehicle. You feel the space around the car. You flinch when it gets too close to the curb, not because your body is in danger, but because your self has extended into the machine. The same thing happens in relationships. Emotional entanglement causes your identity to blur into others. When a loved one is in pain, you hurt. When they succeed, you feel lifted. The borders of self and other become porous, fluid. You don't just empathize, you merge, even if only briefly. But the most haunting examples come from the breakdown of this boundary. In neurological disorders like depersonalization or out-of-body experiences, people report a profound disconnection from the self. They float outside their body. They feel like a stranger watching from above. The I no longer resides behind the eyes. It drifts. It observes the body as an object. And yet, the person remains conscious, thinking, narrating. So who or what is having the experience? Or, take the phenomenon of rubber hand illusion. One more time. When a fake hand is stroked in sync with your real hidden hand, you begin to feel the fake hand as your own. The brain updates its sense of self based on external cues. Ownership is malleable. Edges can be redrawn. In the absence of cues, the self begins to unravel. Sensory deprivation tanks, meditation, psychedelics, all these can produce ego dissolution, the loss of self-boundaries. Users report merging with space, becoming light, or experiencing pure awareness with no body, no identity, and the experience feels real, not as a fantasy, but as a deeper truth, as if the idea of self was always the illusion. Because maybe it is. The self is not a thing. It sips a process. It emerges when your brain aligns internal and external signals, body position, emotion, attention, into a coherent narrative. But it's always under construction, and its borders depend entirely on context. When you're anxious, your sense of self contracts. You become trapped in your body, hyper-aware of heartbeat, breath, threat. When you're joyful or creative, it expands. You lose yourself in music, art, conversation. In love you merge. In grief, you fracture. The self is not solid, it sips atmospheric. And its edges are invisible. They are wherever your brain decides you end, and the world begins. But if your brain gets to decide, and it changes its mind constantly, then maybe there is no real separation. Maybe the division between you and the world, you and others, you and everything else, is just a line drawn in neural sand. And maybe the erasure of that line isn't a loss of identity. Maybe it sips a return to something quieter, something wider, something that was never a part to begin with. Everything you perceive, from the smile on a stranger's face to the sting of a memory, is already old by the time it reaches you. Roughly 200 milliseconds old. That's the average time your brain takes to process a stimulus and push it into your conscious awareness. A fifth of a second. In that brief slice of time, the world continues moving, unbothered by your delay. And yet, you never feel it. You never notice the gap, because your brain is an expert time traveler. Backdating perception, smoothing timelines, and stitching together a story that feels like now. But it sits not now. It's just then. Let sips make this concrete. When a flash of light hits your eye, the signal travels from the retina to the visual cortex, then to the association areas for interpretation. By the time you see the light, hundreds of milliseconds have passed. But your brain doesn't present the light as something that used to be there. It places it in the present. It rewrites the clock. You are living in a constant state of post-dated awareness. And the illusion of presence, of immediacy, is just that, an illusion. But your brain doesn't just delay perception, it buffers it. Like a live TV broadcast with a slight delay, your brain waits to receive more data before finalizing what you just experienced. It collects extra context, evaluates meaning, and only then releases the scene to consciousness. This is why your brain can do things like revise your experience of sound based on what happens after the sound. A noise occurs, then a visual cue follows, and your brain may shift the perception of the sound's location, retroactively, as if the later information were there all along. It's SIDS, not perception. It stits post-processing, and once it's stitched together, your brain hands you the result. Here is your reality. Please pretend it's live. But it gets even weirder. This 200 millisecond window isn't just a delay, it's a canvas. A blank space where your brain paints the moment. Using not just raw sensory data, but memory, expectation, emotion, and prediction. You think you're seeing the world, but you're seeing a composite, part input, part imagination. In fact, your brain predicts the present moment before it happens, and then waits for the actual input to arrive. If the prediction matches, it shows you the prediction. If not, it updates the scene, and you don't even notice the switch. This is the secret behind visual stability. Your eyes dart around the room in fast, jerky saccades, movements that would cause constant visual chaos if your brain processed them as is. But during those saccades, your visual system temporarily pauses input. It suspends updates, makes predictions, and then fills in the scene once your eyes land on a new point. And it all fits inside that 200 millisecond delay. You don't see the blur, you don't notice the pause. You just see the room, stable, seamless, whole. Even more unsettling, the delay means you're always acting based on the past. The you who catches a ball, dodges a branch, or slams the brakes isn't reacting in real time. You're anticipating what reality will be, and your body moves before you consciously experience the event. Your conscious self arrives after the fact, and then takes credit for the action. I decided to move, you think. But the decision was made long before you showed up. And this, perhaps, is the most dangerous illusion of all, that you are in control, that you live in the moment, that you choose your response. In truth, much of your life unfolds in that shadowed space just before awareness, that 200 millisecond gap where perception lags and decisions form in silence. So what happens if you extend the gap? When we slow down, through meditation, boredom, psychedelics or trauma, we sometimes become aware of the lag. Time feels stretchy, events feel delayed or too early. The illusion of simultaneity breaks, and for a moment you glimpse the machinery behind the curtain. You realize that the now you live in is always already gone. And yet, you go on believing in it. Because the delay is invisible, and its product is perfect. The moment you're in right now, it's already finished, already curated, already processed by a hidden self you'll never meet. You are not experiencing life in real time. You are experiencing the rendered past, edited into the illusion of presence. And the real moment, you never actually see it. You only remember it, just fast enough to believe it was still happening. You look at a cup, and you think, that's just a cup, a simple object, a neutral thing. But it isn't. Because what you're seeing isn't just ceramic and light. You're seeing a concept, a deeply layered mental construction, a cognitive wrapper, something your brain has draped over a shape to make it mean something. And you do this with everything. Every object you encounter is wrapped in an invisible film of memory, purpose, language, emotion, and expectation. You never perceive a thing as it is. You perceive it as what it means to you. That cup? It might be mine, or hot, or safe, or the one she used to hold. Those aren't properties of the object. They're properties of your mind. Let's break it down. The process begins with your visual system recognizing basic shapes, edges, contours, the raw geometry of the object. But the brain doesn't stop there. It instantly pulls in semantic knowledge from your memory. What is this? What is it for? Have I seen it before? You don't consciously do this. You just know what you're looking at. But that knowing is layered, and it changes how you see. In milliseconds, your brain activates neural circuits in the ventral stream, sometimes called the what pathway, that categorizes the object, not just as a cup, but as this cup. The chipped one, the heavy one, the one that feels too warm in the morning, or too cold in your hand. The object becomes drenched in meaning. And once it sits labeled, it sits no longer neutral. You begin to filter it through emotion. Maybe the cup reminds you of a conversation. Maybe you associate it with a time in your life. Maybe it holds a subtle trace of anxiety or comfort, based on nothing more than memory. The object is now wrapped in cognitive fabric. But here sets where it gets strange. Even your body responds to that wrapper. Studies show that holding a warm object, like a cup of tea, can make people judge others as more generous or trustworthy. The warmth of the object bleeds into the warmth of the concept. The physical and the cognitive intertwine. Your brain doesn't treat objects as separate from thought. It treats them as extensions of thought, and it edits them based on context. Take the famous Kiki and Booba effect. People are shown two shapes, one jagged, one round, and asked which one is Kiki and which one is Booba. Nearly everyone agrees the spiky shape is Kiki, the smooth one Booba. The names have no inherent meaning, but your brain wraps the shapes in sound, and the sound in shape, until they feel connected. Your perception is always multi-layered. And once you wrap an object with an idea, you can't unsee it. This is why branding works. The same pair of shoes, one with a swoosh, one without, feels different, looks different, has a different energy. That's not the shoe, that's the wrapper your brain has assigned. You don't see the thing, you see the symbol. This is also why trauma is object-based. A chair might not be just a chair. It might be the chair. The one where something happened. The one that was thrown. The one that was empty when it shouldn't have been. And no matter how many times you see it again, it's never just furniture. It's memory made solid. But it works the other way too. A book might not just be paper and ink. It might be the thing that saved you, that connected you to someone, that held your hand when no one else did. Its weight is emotional. Its presence, alive. Because the wrapper shapes the world, you're never really seeing objects. You're seeing ideas made physical. Every item on your desk, every tool you use, every piece of clothing you own, they're all avatars of something else. Safety, control, identity, love, belonging, loss. You've built a symbolic map of your life, and you move through it as if it were real. And in a way, it is. Because your brain treats these objects as part of your extended mind. This is the extended cognition hypothesis. The idea that tools, environments, and artifacts become part of how you think. A notebook isn't set just storage. It is part of your memory. Your phone isn't set just a device. It sets a limb, a second brain. You're not just thinking with neurons. You're thinking with everything you've wrapped in meaning. Which means your reality isn't set made of atoms. It's made of stories, attached to shapes, textures, names. The world is not neutral. Its stats narrated. And you are the narrator, wrapping each object with invisible threads. So when you hold that cup, you steer not holding ceramic. You steer holding a version of yourself. You walk through a hallway. It narrows. You turn a corner. It widens. The space stretches and squeezes around you. Simple, right? But what if the hallway didn't set change at all? What if it was your brain doing the bending? Subtly warping the dimensions of the world, folding and unfolding space like origami, all without your awareness. Because space as you perceive it isn't fixed. It's not an objective container waiting to be discovered. It's a constantly shifting, mentally projected illusion, and your brain distorts it all the time. Let's start with something familiar. Size constancy. You see a person walking away, shrinking into the distance. Their image on your retina gets smaller, but your brain knows they're not actually shrinking. So it adjusts. It stretches the surrounding space to maintain the illusion of a stable world. The person stays the same size in your mind, because your brain silently inflates the space between you. Now consider the Ames room, a famous optical illusion, where a distorted room is constructed in such a way that people appear to grow or shrink depending on where they stand. Your brain assumes the room is rectangular, so it warps the space within that assumption, and you see a reality that doesn't exist. Your perception of space isn't built from the ground up. It's inferred, based on shadows, edges, motion, expectation. When those cues are manipulated, the map bends, and you never notice. You even distort space based on emotion. When you're afraid, a hallway feels longer, a staircase seems steeper, a cliff edge appears more dangerous, not because your eyes are faulty, but because your brain is modulating spatial perception to keep you safe. Your emotional state changes the geometry of the world. Even your internal space gets warped. When you're in pain, your body can feel larger. A toothache can make your whole face feel swollen. A migraine can stretch behind your eyes like a collapsing tunnel. The body expands. Space becomes heavy. And your body in space is just as unstable. In one study, subjects wore virtual reality headsets that distorted their sense of arm length. After only a few minutes, they began to perceive objects as closer or farther based on their new imagined reach. The brain updated the map of space to match the tool. You don't live in fixed coordinates. You live in a map that rewrites itself with every gesture. But what happens when the distortion goes unnoticed? You might walk into a familiar room and feel like it's off. Too wide, too echoey. You blame your mood, or maybe the lighting. But what you're feeling is a spatial recalibration. The brain's quiet reshaping of internal coordinates in response to new input. Your ears help with this too. Echolocation, even on a basic level, helps you determine the shape of rooms. Without you realizing it, your brain processes subtle reverberations to guess ceiling height and room size. Blind individuals often do this more consciously, but you do it too, unconsciously, continuously. So when you enter a cathedral and feel awe, that's not just emotion. It's your brain detecting spatial vastness, stretching the internal volume of your perception. The space grows inside you. Your neural maps expand to fit the architecture. But here's the twist. The brain doesn't just respond to space. It creates it, even where none exists. Close your eyes. Imagine a room, a memory, your childhood home. You can walk through it in your mind. That imagined space feels real, not like a flat photo, but like a three-dimensional environment with textures, echoes, lighting. The same neural networks that map external space, the parietal cortex, the hippocampus, also generate imagined space. To your brain, memory is geography, thought is architecture. And that architecture isn't set fixed. Ever noticed how your childhood house seems smaller when you return to it as an adult? That's not just nostalgia. It's a shift in spatial calibration. Your internal scale changed. The world didn't shrink, you expanded, and your brain adjusted the map accordingly. Even time and space blend. In some languages, people speak of the future as ahead, and the past as behind. Others do the reverse. In psychological experiments, people physically lean forward when talking about the future, and backward when discussing the past. The brain spatializes time, and when you change the story, the geometry changes too. Because in the end, space is not a structure. It's a suggestion, a shaped feeling, a hallucinated framework projected outward from a body that only ever exists in one place, here. But where is here really? Wherever your attention decides it is. And that's enough for the brain to build walls, doors, roads, stars, a whole cosmos stitched together from shadows and signals. The world doesn't bend around you. You bend the world to fit your mind. Your life feels like a movie, a smooth, unfolding stream of moments, one leading into the next. No skips, no jumps, just constant flow. But that's not what's happening. You're not living in a seamless reel of reality. You're experiencing a stitched-together sequence of snapshots, assembled by your brain to feel like continuity. And every second, that illusion is on the verge of collapse. Let's start with your eyes. They don't glide like a camera. They jerk. They twitch. You perform saccades, rapid, ballistic eye movements, 3 to 5 times per second. During each saccade, your visual input is suppressed. You're effectively blind for a split second, and your brain deletes that blackout from awareness. Imagine a film where every 5th frame is cut out, but you never notice. That's your life, and it's been edited that way since the moment you opened your eyes. But it gets stranger. Even between saccades, your brain doesn't see in a constant flow. It samples visual information in discrete chunks, a kind of internal frame rate. Studies using EEG and visual illusions show that perception happens in pulses, around 10 to 13 times per second, you don't perceive smooth motion. You perceive moments that are later smoothed over into fluidity. This is the illusion of continuity. Your brain plays editor and director, filling in gaps, adjusting timing, reshaping space, until it delivers a final cut that feels real time. But what you're actually living in is a reconstruction, a patchwork, a story that's constantly being revised in the background. Think about how you experience music. Each note is a discrete sound, but when played in sequence, your brain creates the illusion of a melody, a flowing river of tone. Interrupt the rhythm, and the illusion shatters. Suddenly the gaps are visible, but while it plays smoothly, you never question it. You call it continuous. The same happens with motion. A spinning fan appears solid, a blinking neon sign seems fluid, a flipbook of drawings becomes a cartoon. Your brain turns broken pieces into fluid motion, as long as they follow a pattern. If the rhythm breaks, the cracks appear. This is why movie frame rates matter. At 24 frames per second, your brain is tricked into seeing movement. At fewer frames, you begin to notice the flicker, the truth beneath the illusion. But perception isn't the only thing your brain stitches. So is memory. Your sense of self is built from a vast archive of moments, some detailed, some vague, that your brain strings together into a personal narrative. But those memories are not stored like video. They're reconstructed every time you recall them. And with each retrieval, details shift. Order changes, meaning evolves. You don't set to remember your life. You rewrite it, again and again. And each version feels like the only version. Even identity is part of this trick. You believe you are a continuous I, the same person today as yesterday, but your brain updates your personality, preferences, and even moral beliefs gradually. These changes are subtle, spaced out, buffered by the illusion of a stable self. You change. But continuity keeps you from noticing. Think about waking from a dream. 1 second, you're deep in a surreal story. The next, you're in your bed. The transition feels abrupt, but within seconds your brain backfills the gap. It rewrites the handoff between dream and waking, stitching them into one timeline. This is the trick your brain plays all the time. Hiding transitions, filling silences, masking skips, like a magician who draws your eye away during the switch. And you want it that way. Because true discontinuity is terrifying. It's confusion, it's vertigo, it's amnesia. Continuity is comfort, it's story, it's the illusion of a now that extends backward and forward, giving you a thread to follow. But the thread is braided from blanks. You don't see everything. You see enough to believe. You don't sew and remember everything. You remember just enough to keep the plot going. And in the gaps between the remembered and the perceived, your brain paints certainty, meaning, narrative. You are not a character in a film. You are the editor. And every moment, you cut out the pieces that don't fit, and call what's left the truth. Because life doesn't happen in a line. It happens in fragments. And the only thing holding it together is the trick your brain plays to make you feel whole. There is a moment you believe you're living in, a razor-thin slice between what just happened and what's about to come. You call it now. But the truth is, now doesn't exist. At least, not the way you think it does. Because what you experience as the present moment is not something your brain receives. It's something your brain constructs. Delayed, distorted, hallucinated, and served up with absolute confidence. Every second, your brain stitches together fragments of the past, predictions of the future, and selective attention into a seamless simulation it calls now. But by the time you feel it, its step's already gone. Let's just go back to those 200 milliseconds. The average time it takes for a sensory input, a light, a sound, a touch, to be processed and pushed into your conscious awareness. That means everything you're experiencing is already in the past. But it doesn't feel that way. Your brain disguises the delay. It rearranges time behind the scenes, creating a version of the world that feels live, even though it's always after the fact. But this delay is only part of the illusion. The bigger deception is the idea that now is a fixed point. It isn't it. There is no single moment in time when all your senses converge. Visual information arrives faster than sound. Touch may take longer depending on where it's felt on the body. Smell lags even further. Your brain receives all this staggered input from multiple timelines, and then binds it into one coherent moment. This binding is messy. It involves guesswork, memory, and expectation. And still, somehow, it works. You walk through your life believing that all your senses are syncing in perfect real-time harmony, but they aren't. Your now is a best-guess composite, a mental hallucination of simultaneity. Sometimes, this illusion cracks. In experiments using delayed audio and visual stimuli, participants often misjudge the order of events. A flash comes before a beep, but is reported as simultaneous or reversed. Why? Because the brain edits the timeline after the fact. It doesn't give you raw time. It gives you an emotionally and behaviorally useful time. This is why, under stress, time seems to slow. The brain floods with adrenaline, attention sharpens, memory encoding increases. You feel like more happened in a short period, but it wasn't time that changed. It was your internal construction of the present expanding to absorb more detail. The now inflated, then deflated, and you thought the clock moved slower. The opposite happens during boredom, when nothing new is happening, and your brain compresses the present, editing out repetition. Suddenly, entire minutes vanish. You look at the clock and realize you can't remember the last few. So what is now? A container for attention. It's the slice of time you're focused on, shaped by context, arousal, memory, and even culture. In some indigenous languages, the present isn't described as a moment, but as a relationship, something that expands or contracts, depending on what's relevant to the body and the tribe. Your now is not universal. It stems personal, and it can be hacked. In deep meditation, practitioners often report the collapse of linear time. The present moment becomes stretched, eternal, boundaryless. In contrast, certain drugs can fragment the present, turning milliseconds into eternities, or compressing hours into instants. Even simple activities like playing music or sports can alter your experience of the present. In flow states, time loses meaning. The sense of self dissolves. You don't feel like you're in a moment. You are the moment. But then, afterward, the illusion resumes. You check the clock. You feel the world click back into frames. Your brain resumes its editing. It begins the loop again. Collect the fragments, guess the order, smooth the playback, present the hallucination. This, it says, this is now. But the raw truth? There is no now. Only a constantly rewritten moment, already past by the time you live it. A hallucinated hinge between memory and prediction. A flickering spotlight on a stage built from delay and error. And yet, you trust it completely. You build your identity on it. You make your choices inside it. You fall in love within it. You believe in its reality, because the alternative is unbearable, to accept that you never actually touch the present, only its echo. But maybe that sips enough. Maybe this hallucinated now is the closest thing to truth your brain can offer. And maybe the miracle isn't that it sips fake, but that it feels so real. When you look in the mirror, you see you. A face, a story, a continuity stretching backward through time. Maybe you don't like all of what you see, but still, it's you, unmistakably, unquestionably, right? But what if this too is an illusion? Not the face, not the image, but the you behind it, the sense of a consistent, unified identity. Because what you think of as yourself is not a solid object. It's a reflection, a refracted projection shaped by memory, expectation, feedback, and attention, an optical illusion constructed by your brain, polished by repetition, and constantly re-rendered as needed. Your identity, in short, is seen more than it is known. Let's begin with the facts. Your brain doesn't have a central control room where the real you sits and makes decisions. There is no single neuron firing that declares, I am me. Instead, your sense of self emerges from distributed networks, the default mode network, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, and more, all coordinating to produce a narrative of who you are. This narrative isn't static. It updates constantly, with new information, social feedback, and internal emotion. If someone praises you, your self-esteem ticks upward. If you fail at something important, it dips. If you spend years in a different culture, your sense of self shifts subtly, slowly, until you're no longer quite who you were. And yet, it feels stable. Because the brain is a master illusionist, particularly when it comes to the self. Take the endowment effect, where simply owning an object makes you value it more. The moment something is yours, it reflects back onto your sense of self. It becomes part of your identity. The same is true with ideas, with beliefs, with routines, with names. You don't just have thoughts, you wrap yourself in them. You take your opinions as proof of who you are. You take your preferences, coffee over tea, cats over dogs, as evidence of a deeper self. But many of these preferences are arbitrary, shaped by early experience, context, or mimicry. The self isn't choosing, the self is reacting, and then backfilling a story. That story is reinforced through optics. How you appear to others becomes part of who you are. A compliment changes how you see yourself. A public failure becomes internal shame. Every reflection, literal or social, becomes part of the lens you use to define you. Even physical posture affects identity. Stand tall, and you feel more confident. Smile, and your mood lifts. Act generous, and you feel kind. The brain observes the body and draws conclusions. If I'm doing this, I must be this. The body is the mirror, and the mirror lies. But the illusion deepens in moments of dissociation. Ever catch yourself doing something and feel like a stranger? Hear your voice on a recording and not recognize it? Read an old journal and feel like someone else wrote it? These cracks in the illusion reveal something uncomfortable. The self you know is a construction maintained by attention and familiarity. Turn away from the mirror for too long, and the reflection fades. In psychological experiments, people presented with subtly morphed versions of their own face often fail to detect the change, even when the face becomes not them. The line between self and other is thinner than we think. The optic of identity is flexible, sometimes too flexible, and yet, it feels solid. That's the paradox. The more fluid the self becomes neurologically, the more certain it feels psychologically. This is by design. Certainty is stabilizing. It allows you to act, to plan, to form relationships. But beneath the certainty is something closer to vapor, always shifting, always rewriting itself in the background. Even your moral identity, what you believe is good, just, or important, changes over time. You may look back on an earlier version of yourself and cringe, or feel pride. Either way, that old self feels distant, and still, you claim continuity. Because the illusion of identity is not just internal. It steps optical. It steps visual, emotional, story-based. It's the sum total of how you've been seen, how you want to be seen, and how you believe others might see you in the future. It's a moving mirror, and you're constantly walking around it, trying to catch your reflection at just the right angle. But there is no final angle. No stable reflection. Only a collection of echoes in glass. And the one watching, the you behind the mirror, that sip's just another trick of light. Every thought you've ever had, from the voice in your head reading this sentence, to the opinions you hold about yourself and others, is bouncing around inside a chamber. A quiet, padded room with no doors. Your brain. But here's the twist. It's not a chamber that echoes the outside world. It echoes itself, recycling assumptions, replaying memories, confirming beliefs, and reinforcing the illusion that what you're thinking must be true. This is the brain's echo chamber, not a metaphor, but a literal and psychological reality, one that shapes your perception of the world, of truth, and most disturbingly of you. Let's start with the basics. Your brain is predictive. It doesn't wait passively for information to arrive. It guesses. It anticipates what you're about to see, hear, or feel, and then uses actual sensory input merely to confirm or update those guesses. Most of the time, if the prediction is close enough, the brain doesn't even bother updating. It just accepts the guess as real. This system is efficient. Its steps also dangerous. Because over time your brain starts trusting its predictions more than it trusts the raw data. You start to live in a self-reinforcing loop. You think people don't sit like you, so you interpret neutral faces as hostile, and your brain says, "See, I knew it." You believe you're bad at something, so every failure stands out, while every success is ignored, forgotten, or reinterpreted as a fluke. You believe something is true about politics, identity, spirituality, and your brain starts selecting evidence that confirms that belief, while filtering out anything that contradicts it. This is confirmation bias. And it's not just a cognitive flaw, it's a feature of how the brain processes information to reinforce coherence over contradiction. Because contradiction feels dangerous. It creates discomfort. A gap between belief and reality. This is cognitive dissonance, and your brain hates it, so it bends perception to reduce the tension. It rewrites memory, it rationalizes behavior, it reframes events, all to preserve the illusion of a stable, predictable self in a stable, predictable world. And the longer you live in that loop, the stronger it gets. The echoes get louder. You begin to believe that your thoughts are facts, that your emotions are evidence, that your assumptions are reality. And soon, everything you hear, see, and feel is a reflection of what you already believe. This is the echo chamber effect, not caused by social media or politics, but by the architecture of the mind itself. Even your inner voice participates. The narrator in your head, the one commenting on your actions, doubting your worth, predicting the worst, is not an objective reporter, it's a part of the ecosystem. It speaks in the language your beliefs have taught it, and its opinions often go unchallenged. Because it sounds like you. And if it sips you, it must be right. Right? But the voice is not the truth. It's a pattern, shaped by memory, repetition, fear, culture. It loops and loops until it becomes invisible, like background noise. You don't hear it, you live by it, you become it. Unless you break the echo. And that sips hard. Because the brain resists silence. In the absence of new input, it replays the old, like an empty concert hall filled with fading chords. Your mind fills in the blank space with the most familiar melodies, your fears, your doubts, your stories, and over time, those stories harden into reality. You become trapped in a version of yourself written by repetition. But there is a way out. The brain can be trained to pause, to notice the loop, to recognize that just because a thought is loud, doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's familiar, doesn't mean it's right. Meditation, therapy, journaling, these are not just mental health tools, they are echo disruptors. They teach the mind to listen without reacting, to observe without believing, to hear the voice in the chamber, and not assume it speaks the truth. And once you learn to do that, even for a second, something strange happens. You hear what seeps beneath the echo, a softer voice, a quieter knowing, a signal that wasn't generated by fear, or habit, or repetition, but by presence. And in that presence the chamber feels bigger. The walls less solid. The door, maybe not locked. Maybe it was never locked. Maybe the echo only seemed endless because you'd never stepped outside of it. But now you've seen the chamber for what it is. Not evil, not broken, just protective, predictive, trying to keep you safe by keeping you small. And the moment you notice it, you stirred already free. Even if just for a breath. You feel it when you tap your fingers against your skin. When you grasp a doorknob. When a warm breeze brushes your arm. Touch, so primal, so immediate. Seems like the most direct experience we can have with the world. But what if you've never actually touched anything? Not really. Because at the atomic level, nothing touches. Your skin, your cells, the atoms in your body, they never truly come into contact with the atoms of the object you're reaching for. What you experience as touch is actually a force field, the electromagnetic repulsion between negatively charged electron clouds. The closer you get, the stronger the repulsion becomes. But there is no fusion, no contact, no merging. Touch is a trick. A convincing one, orchestrated by your brain. Let's break it down. Your skin contains specialized receptors, mechanoreceptors, that respond to pressure, vibration, and stretch. When stimulated, they send electrical signals up your spinal cord to the somatosensory cortex in your brain. That's where the illusion begins. Because your brain doesn't just register raw data, it builds a map. It constructs a model of your body in space, complete with texture, temperature, tension, and boundary. And every sensation is compared to that map. When something touches you, the brain checks its records. Where is this? What's its shape? Is it dangerous? Is it familiar? You think you stir feeling the world. You stir feeling your brain SIP's model of the world. This becomes obvious when the model breaks. In phantom limb syndrome, amputees continue to feel sensations, even pain, in limbs that no longer exist. Their body map wasn't updated, so the brain continues to project sensation into empty space. A hand that's not there can still itch. To the brain, the map is more real than the flesh. Or take the rubber hand illusion. When a fake hand is stroked in synchrony with your hidden real hand, your brain begins to accept the rubber one as part of your body. You don't just see the touch, you feel it, even though no contact is happening with your flesh. The touch is simulated. Because for your brain, touch is not about contact. It's about coherence. As long as the signals align, visually, spatially, temporally, the brain accepts the illusion. It feels real. It becomes real. Your perception of where your body ends and the world begins is more flexible than you think. Now consider how much of your world is built on this illusion. The comfort of a blanket, the pressure of a hug, the jolt of pain when you stub your toe. None of it is what it seems. You're not touching the world. You're reacting to invisible forces. You're living inside a neural simulation of contact. Detailed, textured, and utterly convincing. Even pain is constructed. If you touch a hot stove, the withdrawal reflex happens before your brain even registers the burn. Your spinal cord initiates the movement. Only after the danger has passed does your brain generate the sensation of pain as a memory of the event, not as a live feed. The burn already happened. The touch is over. What you feel is a replay, the brain's story of what just occurred. Touch lags behind action. Yet, it feels immediate. Because your brain rewrites the timeline, backdating the pain to match the moment of contact. It edits reality for continuity, for believability, for narrative. Even your sense of texture isn't set real. Run your fingers along a rough surface. You feel bumps, grooves, edges, but that's not direct contact. It's vibration, tiny shifts in pressure transduced by your fingertips. The sensation of smoothness, softness, grit. These are mental interpretations of frequency patterns. The silk isn't set soft. Your brain just interprets it that way. In fact, even imagined touch activates the somatosensory cortex. Athletes who visualize physical motions can improve performance. Meditators can feel warmth or pressure in the body through thought alone. Your brain doesn't distinguish well between real touch and imagined touch, because all touch is imagined to begin with. So what does this mean? It means your most intimate connection with the world, your sense of physically being here, is built on absence, on electric whispers and phantom naps, on predictions, assumptions, and the ghost of contact that never actually happened. You are not touching the world. You are touching your mind's best guess at the world. And that guess is so precise, so rich, so believable, you forget it's not real. But deep down, part of you knows. Every time you flinch from a shadow that never hit you, every time you feel a tap on your shoulder that isn't there, every time you wake from a dream, heart racing, from the memory of a touch that never was, you remember briefly that touch is not contact. It's construction, and the hand you thought you felt was never really there. Close your eyes and imagine a red apple. Can you see it? The shine on the skin, the gentle curve, the contrast between shadow and light? Now open your eyes. That same painter, the one who rendered the apple in your imagination, is still at work. Only now, they're creating the world itself. Every surface, every shadow, every beam of sunlight, all are brushstrokes, composed by your brain, not just interpreted, but invented. There is a painter behind your eyes, and you are not just seeing the world, you are being shown a version of it. This painter is tireless. Every second, it processes a storm of photons bouncing off objects, striking the retina and translating them into neural signals. But what you see is not raw light. It is vision, sculpted and curated, colored by attention, sharpened by memory, softened by need. Your visual cortex, especially the occipital lobe at the back of your brain, acts less like a camera and more like a creative studio. It fills in blanks. It adds depth. It simulates motion. It uses past experience to decide what you should be seeing now. Think about the blind spot in each eye, the area where the optic nerve exits the retina, where no photoreceptors exist. That part of the world simply doesn't reach you, and yet you never see a hole. The painter fills it in. It guesses, and its guess is so smooth, so fast, that you don't question it. It stuts not deception. It stuts design. Because truth is expensive, and coherence is good enough. The painter behind your eyes doesn't just color reality. It edits it, and sometimes, it does so with bold strokes. Consider color constancy. A white shirt looks white under the orange haze of sunset, and under the sterile blue of fluorescent lights. The wavelengths hitting your eyes are completely different in each case. but your painter adjusts for context, lighting, assumption. The shirt is white because you believe it is white. The raw data doesn't yet matter. The story does. Or take change blindness. When two images flash before you with subtle differences, an object missing, a color shifted, most people don't notice. Even when staring straight at the change, because the painter smooths the transition. It assumes stability, continuity, it paints over the change unless something specifically tells it to update. Your painter is not omniscient. It sips practical. It prioritizes objects that move, faces that emote, edges that threaten. Everything else becomes backdrop, flattened, blurred, filled in. And this isn't just about sight. This painter works across consciousness itself. The emotions you see in others' eyes, you paint those. The meaning you assign to a passing glance, you color that too. Even silence has tone, shaped by how the painter inside you interprets the void. In dreams, the painter is unchained. With your eyes closed, no light entering, no world pressing in, the painter still conjures mountains, monsters, streets that never existed. The same networks that process waking reality spring to life and render alternate worlds as vivid as the one you're in now. Because the difference between dream and waking is not the quality of the brushstrokes. It sets the degree of belief in the canvas. And that canvas, it exists only in your mind. The painter also works with shortcuts. Your fova, the tiny part of your retina that sees in high resolution, makes up only a small portion of your visual field. You should see the world as a blur, with only a sharp dot in the middle, but you don't. Because the painter blends the rest. It uses memory, pattern recognition, predictive models, and extends high resolution outward from your point of focus. A guess, a blur, made sharp, a background filled in. You walk through a high-definition illusion painted in real time. But here's the thing. You can't meet this painter. You can't see their brush. You can only sense their presence in the errors, the optical illusions, the misperceptions, the moments when the mask slips, when you think you saw someone smile, but they didn't, when you remember a color being brighter, when you can't recall whether your eyes were open or closed in that strange moment. And if there's a painter behind your eyes, what does that make you? Not the painter. Not even the observer. But perhaps the character in the painting, walking across a shifting canvas, believing it's solid ground. You never see the raw world. You see the painting. And the painting sees you back. Try to catch it. Right now. Hold it. Freeze it. Own it. The present moment. It slips backward into memory, or forward into anticipation. You're left with a ghost, a trace of what just was, or what might be next. And no matter how still you sit, how focused your breath becomes, how hard you try to hold on, the present always arrives too late, or vanishes too soon. But the second you do, it's gone. So where is it? Because the present, as you imagine it, this tiny slice of time between past and future, is a fiction, a psychological mirage, a convenient placeholder created by your brain to keep you oriented. But it's not a fixed point. It's a moving average, built from memory, prediction, and guesswork. You never actually experience now. You only assemble it, retroactively. Why can you find now? Let steps go deeper. To make sense of this chaos, your brain buffers perception, holding on to information for just a moment, before releasing it into your awareness. This tiny delay, as little as a few hundred milliseconds, allows your mind to synchronize the inputs into what feels like a single unified now. Your brain processes each sensory input on a different timeline. Light arrives faster than sound. Touch is slower still depending on where it occurs on the body. Signals travel at varying speeds, through different circuits, encountering delays, filters and revisions along the way. It sits playback. You're watching a neural highlight reel of a moment that's already over. But it sits not real time. When you're in danger, time feels slow. Your brain widens the perceptual window, gathering more detail. When you're bored, time collapses, the window shrinks, the present disappears. Your brain shifts the size of your now based on context. And the timeline isn't set even consistent. You don't experience the flow of time. The result is a constant feeling of being here, when in fact, you're always one step behind. You experience the brain SIP's interpretation of it. So not only can you not catch the present, you can't even catch yourself in it. Brain scans show that the sense of agency, the feeling of being the one who just acted, comes after the action has already begun. You decide, then act? No. You act, then feel like you decided. Your awareness trails your behavior by fractions of a second, and your brain fills in the explanation later. Even yourself is delayed. And when you try. This is the paradox of mindfulness. The more intensely you try to focus on the moment, the more elusive it becomes. Like staring at a word until it loses meaning, the present disintegrates under scrutiny. You become aware of your own awareness, looping inward, until even the breath feels abstract. You create tension. It creates it. But the moment it does, the moment becomes the past. Because attention cannot point to the present. Like trying to photograph a lightning strike, what you capture is never the thing, only the aftermath. If you're never in the present, how can you be present? What does it mean to say, live in the moment, when the moment itself is always a memory? Now imagine the implications. It means that presence is not a position in time. It sets a mode of perception. To be present is not to stand on some metaphysical dot between past and future. It's to quiet the mental time travel, the looping thoughts about what was and what might be, and allow the brain to stop correcting, revising, predicting. It stunts not being in time. Presence is the suspension of mental commentary. It sits being beneath time. And most of the time, you aren't set. Your mind is skipping ahead to consequences, to judgments, to alternate outcomes, or it's looking back, retracing steps, rewriting history. Even when you're physically still, mentally you're pacing, running between timelines, never home. And yet, you crave now. Because now feels like freedom, simplicity, rest. The illusion of now is comforting, like the illusion of a flat earth used to be. It feels true. It feels intuitive, but it is a mental construction, built from delay and inference. And once you realize that, you stop trying to find now. You stop grasping for it like a coin rolling under a table. Instead, you recognize that what you've called the present was never a point in time. It was a pulse, a rhythm, a breath in the mind. And though you cannot hold it, you can be held by it. For a moment, then gone again. What if the solid world around you, the chair you sit on, the table you lean against, the air you breathe, is not as solid as you think? What if matter itself is at its core not an independent reality, but something woven together by the very neurons inside your brain? This isn't just poetic speculation. It's a growing insight from neuroscience and quantum physics. Your brain doesn't just passively perceive matter. It constructs the experience of solidity, weight and form from raw sensory signals. Matter, at the smallest scale, is mostly empty space. Atoms consist of tiny nuclei surrounded by clouds of electrons. The forces holding objects together are electromagnetic interactions, fields of energy pushing and pulling particles. No tiny balls smashing into each other, but dynamic waves of probability. Yet your brain composes all of this into concrete things you can touch and see. How? Through neural representations, patterns of activity in the somatosensory cortex, the visual cortex, and associative areas that synthesize disparate signals into a unified sense of objectness. Your brain receives vibrations from skin receptors, pressure cues from muscles, light patterns from your eyes, and combines them into an integrated map. What results is not the world itself, but your brain's best guess of it. This guesswork explains illusions where matter seems to behave oddly, rubber hands you feel as your own, phantom limbs you can touch, or objects that appear to float or disappear. Your brain fills in missing data, predicts surface texture, and even invents sensations. Quantum physics deepens this mystery. At quantum scales, particles don't have fixed positions until observed. Reality is a haze of probabilities collapsing into definite states only when measured. Your brain, as the ultimate observer, participates in the emergence of matter's solidity. So, in a profound sense, the fabric of matter is partly neural. It's shaped by how your brain filters, predicts, and organizes sensory input into the stable objects you interact with. When you touch a table, you're not connecting with fixed atoms. You're feeling the boundaries your brain creates by interpreting electromagnetic forces as solid. This process protects you, keeping you from feeling the chaos at microscopic scales, and provides a reliable interface with the world. The neural fabric of matter is your brain's masterpiece, a seamless illusion so convincing that it feels unshakably real. But it sits fragile. it can be altered. In neurological disorders like stereognosis, patients lose the ability to recognize objects by touch, despite normal skin sensation. Their brain's representations falter, and matter becomes meaningless. The chair is a vague pressure, not an object. Reality dissolves. Psychedelics provide another glimpse. They disrupt normal sensory processing and integration, altering the perception of solidity in space. Objects breathe, shimmer, or melt away. The boundaries of matter become porous. Users report sensing energy fields or vibrations instead of solid things. This shows how much of matter's experience depends on the brain's interpretative work. Even in everyday life, your perception of weight and density fluctuates. A backpack feels heavier when you're tired or anxious. A handshake feels firm or limp, depending on your mood. The hardness of matter is a dialogue between the external and your internal state. Your brain's construction of matter ties directly into your sense of safety and agency. Solid things anchor you. They provide boundaries. They create a stable world where you can act. Without that construction, you would float in chaos. And yet, knowing that your experience of matter is a neural construction need not dissolve your connection to reality. Instead, it reveals a deeper truth. You are not a passive observer of the universe, but a participant in its unfolding. Your brain is both artist and audience, painting the fabric of matter, weaving a world where you can live, love, and dream. And that world, your world, is miraculous. From the moment you opened your eyes this morning, you've been living inside a world created by your brain. Every color, every shape, every sound and sensation, woven together into a seamless tapestry called reality. But here's the deepest paradox. Everything you perceive, the universe itself, is not outside you. It was always inside. The universe you know, the cosmos you experience, is a projection of neural activity, a simulation constructed moment by your mind. The stars you see, the mountains you climb, the laughter you hear, all arise from electrical impulses, chemical dances, and patterns firing in your brain's vast networks. Not metaphorically, literally. Your senses are interfaces, translating the external into inner experience. But the final product, the experience, is created within. The outside world as you know, it does not exist, apart from your perception of it. Philosophers have called this solipsism, the idea that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Science and neuroscience suggest a softer version. Your brain is the ultimate generator of reality, filtering, interpreting, and building everything you know. And so, in a very real sense, everything was always inside you. This doesn't mean the world isn't real. It means that reality is not independent of you. You are a participant, a co-creator. Without your brain, the cosmos is silence, darkness, absence. With your brain, the cosmos blooms. Your body, your memories, your emotions, all parts of the same story your brain tells. The universe outside is raw data, sensory input waiting for meaning, but meaning only arises inside. The atoms swirling in distant galaxies and in your fingertips are the same, indivisible building blocks. But the experience of them, the meaning, is yours. Your brain knits these pieces together into coherent stories, places, times, and selves. It blooms in color, in sound, in sensation, in thought. All the beauty, the mystery, the terror, the joy, you carry it inside. Your mind is the universe made conscious. No matter how far you travel, how much you learn, how deeply you probe the stars or the brain, or the depths of your own soul, the ultimate mystery remains inside. And that means the quest for meaning, the search for truth, the yearning for connection, they begin and end with you. You, inside your neurons, inside your consciousness, inside your experience. And perhaps that is the greatest wonder of all. Because in this infinite inner cosmos, every question, every paradox, every fleeting thought is both the journey and the destination. You don't just inhabit the universe. And everything you seek, you are the universe watching itself awake, was always inside you. As we come to the close of this journey, a quiet truth settles. The universe you inhabit, the vast cosmos of stars, the delicate petals of a flower, the warmth of a loved one's touch, is not out there waiting to be discovered. It is a living, breathing creation, constantly woven and rewoven by the astonishing organ nestled within your skull. Your brain, with its mere 12 watts of power, is both the architect and the artist, the painter behind your eyes, the composer of your world's symphony. It builds the colors you see, the sounds you hear, the textures you feel, and even the very sense of time and self you hold so dear. Reality, as you know it, is not a static backdrop, but an active hallucination, a carefully constructed narrative that your brain crafts to keep you alive, connected and sane. This crafted reality is a marvel, a miracle of biology and consciousness. It transforms raw sensory input, chaotic waves of light, sound and touch, into a coherent story where you play the starring role. But it's also a fragile illusion, subject to errors, rewrites, and the subtle bending of space, time and self. You've seen how the brain fills in gaps you never knew existed, how it anticipates before sensing, how it bends the geometry of your world to fit your needs, emotions, and expectations. You've glimpsed how your sense of now is a hallucinated moment, always slightly behind, always already past. You've encountered the echo chamber of your own mind, the painter behind the scenes, and the invisible edges of self. This doesn't diminish your experience. It enriches it. All these reveal one profound realization: the universe, the entire cosmos, might just be a projection, a simulation, a dream created uniquely for you. You are not a passive observer of reality. You are its co-creator. Your mind is a vast stage where matter, space, time, and identity dance together in an endless hypnotic play. And the lines between you and the universe blur. Creator and creation. You are both audience and performer. The stars outside and the stars inside are one and the same. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, remember, in this perspective, the search for meaning becomes not a quest to find something out there, but a journey inward, into the luminous depths of your own consciousness, where the mysteries of existence reside. The universe you dream of is not far away. It steps right here, inside you, waiting to unfold, waiting to reveal. Because everything you ever sought was always inside you.